Jesse Rich started Nutrition Rundown. He's a nutrition coach. We've known each other for a while, and we're getting to do these episodes. And today we're talking about the impacts of alcohol and marijuana on running. One of my favorite movies in junior high was Half Baked. I love laughing at marijuana culture. That is not what we're doing today. Actually, we're just going to take a very professional take on it. We know a lot of runners do consume marijuana. And so I just want to understand it. I personally don't partake in it. But I know a lot of people do, a lot of friends I love dearly. And so I just thought, hey, since we want to be better runners, let's just talk about the impacts of this stuff. So Jesse, today we're going to start with talking about alcohol. Let's just jump right in. Give me the high level summary of impacts of alcohol on running.
Thanks, Josh, for having me on. Yeah, so alcohol is becoming more and more reduced in a lot of people's lives these days. A lot of stuff's coming out about, how honestly zero's better than anything. We used to believe that some small amounts could have health benefits, but more and more, I believe as the Surgeon General came out and just said, we just want to encourage zero.
Wow.
It went from 21 drinks per week to 14 in males. Trying to remember the female stats, but it kind of just keeps dropping. Like we're kind of starting to see that these touted health effects of red wine and the antioxidants in red wine, there's more negative effects associated to alcohol than anything positive. So overall, like I think it's now pretty well known that like it's best to avoid if possible, but I do like beer here and there myself, and it's something that is nice to have in social settings. So you can kind of steer off from the physical side of things and talk about, social effects, the emotional effects, coping mechanism, those type of things perhaps could be healthy for you in other aspects than the physical part. We're not all just, the mental side of things. How are you, dealing with things in life is just kind of beer to wind down, helping you overall. But physically, like I said, we're kind of to this point of like, none is best. But how can we kind of get around enjoying alcohol from time to time and continuing to be a good runner? So it obviously depends on the amount, right? If you are drinking quite a bit of alcohol, then your main issue going on is going to be your liver. Your liver is what is liver is such an important organ in nutrition. It's helping us, circulate nutrients. It's helping us break down fat. There's enzymes produced by the liver. So much is happening in the liver. So if we damage the liver, a lot of issues down the line happen from liver damage. But again, that's like higher amounts. And running can kind of keep your liver healthy as well. So that kind of counteracts some of that. But what I think is the biggest thing in running is sleep. Like we don't talk enough about sleep in coaching and nutrition. That's such a big piece. I mean, that's where the recovery is happening. And so if our sleep is impaired, then our training's impaired. And alcohol can very much affect quality sleep. When we drink alcohol, we get less REM sleep, rapid eye movement. And that is kind of the most critical part of sleep. And we don't get a ton of it each night. It's deep sleep, light sleep. REM sleep is the one that we don't get quite as much of. So we need every minute of it that we can get. And unfortunately, alcohol affects REM sleep pretty drastically, especially as we get older. When our sleep just naturally declines, REM sleep can get worse as well. So,
is REM sleep where like is there something particularly special about it in its healing effects on your body? Like REM sleep is where your body's repairing things more, or do you know what it is about REM sleep?
Yeah, it's the time when repair is really happening the most. There's something about it that like it's where like the brain healing and like downloading and memory is happening the most out of all your sleep.
Wow.
In terms of muscle repair, I believe REM sleep also is a good time for that muscle repair to be happening. So obviously if we can find a way to metabolize alcohol before going to bed, get it out of our system before, then that's a good thing to do. So if you are drinking alcohol, the key is to give yourself quite a bit of time to metabolize the alcohol before going to bed. Like having a beer and going straight to the pillow is like the worst situation,
Yeah.
just kind of like a nightcap situation. What's
Yeah.
best is, maybe you have something with dinner, which food is also going to help metabolize that alcohol and have less impact on your liver with food and obviously with water.
Yeah.
But 2 to 3 hours before bed, you're going to have a much less effect on your sleep than you would right up until you sleep. So that's one thing. And yeah, I could go off for a long time here, but just kind of high level, like you said.
Yeah.
Next thing that's pretty big is, a lot of runners are already struggling to get enough nutrients in, and alcohol affects nutrient absorption.
Oh.
So especially B vitamins. So alcohol reduces stomach acid, and some of those B vitamins are broken down in the stomach. And then also, your stomach lining can get affected by alcohol. And in our stomach lining, the small intestine, we have something called villi, which are these small, almost like finger-like looking organisms on the inside of our intestines. And when we drink, we kind of damage those villi. And so we're not getting as much surface area to absorb nutrients. So again, this is more chronic use. You start to get intestinal damage, start absorbing nutrients less, and then you have some problems there.
I heard a study, so I'm not going to say I read it, and I'm also not going to say this is, then therefore I can say it's categorically true, other than I heard about it recently, and that is people who use mouthwash regularly, they were testing like the microbiome compared to using mouthwash, and what it does to the microbiome. I mean, it's so just from what I heard, again, I'm not saying this is true. This is just something that I heard, that you really are ruining your microbiome by using mouthwash. And so is the key ingredient in mouthwash alcohol, and thus are we ruining our microbiome when we're consuming alcohol?
Yeah, to some extent. Again, alcohol content is going to be lower in the alcohol drink itself. But I mean, if you were to compare, say, like tequila with beer, you're probably going to wipe out more of that. And it's not just within the mouth; it's also in the large intestine that you can be wiping out some of these good bugs too. So that's another thing there. And then, another thing that's tricky, I know that happens a lot in the Pacific Northwest, having lived there, is like they'll have a party at the finish line, and right after the race is the worst time, unfortunately, to have a beer, because you're already finishing dehydrated. You're finishing needing to replenish glycogen. So that's the biggest thing, is to like get carbs in your body to give your muscle energy and protein. And your body will prioritize alcohol metabolism over that, and so you're not able to repair your muscles quite as quickly.
That's an interesting thought, to say your body prioritizes getting rid of the alcohol more than it prioritizes the other thing. Even if that's the only thing you told me, that might, to me kind of points to like your body doesn't want this. Like it's gonna do everything it can. It's gonna prioritize getting this stuff out over giving you like these beneficial things over here. I mean, I don't know. Am I reaching? You think that's probably true there?
No, you're not. Like I hate to say this, because again, I enjoy alcohol also from time to time, but it is a toxic product in the body, and so the body tries to detox from it. Absolutely, like that's a huge priority for the body to do that. So yeah, you're already coming off a race. You're dehydrated. You're trying to prioritize that glycogen resynthesis, and you're trying to get filling recovered again, and so you're just impairing that. So get some water in you, get some food. It is, of course, everybody should celebrate in the way that they'd like to after a huge accomplishment, but get some water and food in your body first, because that's drastically going to affect recovery.
What about kidneys? Does alcohol have any impact on the kidneys? I mean, expressly?
It does, because alcohol is a diuretic, so it actually causes our body to get rid of fluids. So the more you're doing that, the more you can affect the kidneys. And in that fluid release, getting rid of fluids and being a diuretic, we're also getting rid of electrolytes. So a lot of people suspect that hangovers are caused by electrolyte depletion. We're just like peeing and getting rid of a lot of our important fluids. So frequently when we're drinking that we get rid of electrolytes. And then there's this glutathione theory as well, where glutathione is an endogenous antioxidant that we have. And as we get older, we get less glutathione production. And so without glutathione, we cannot really metabolize that alcohol as well. And so some people will even supplement glutathione now. There's like ways to supplement it so you can reduce things like a hangover. There's other like minerals and vitamins people supplement to try to reduce hangover. But essentially, as we age, we produce less of those things. So hangovers can be worse, and we, end up drinking less and still feeling worse. So that's the thing with aging and alcohol too.
What about, okay, so then back to the liver. Let's say, alcohol is having a negative effect on your liver, the amount you're consuming. How would that manifest? I mean, is it obvious, or is it something that's like, hey, later in life, you look at the liver, or when they're doing the autopsy, it's like, oh man, this guy really could have had a better life.
That's the thing with the liver. Apparently you don't really know too much until it can be too late.
Too late. Yeah.
But that's the thing too. There are quite a few genes related to alcohol metabolism, so it's really dependent on how you react. Yeah. So some people will have flushing. You may have noticed some people will get like red. That's more of a Asian continent genetic mutation where people will have this flushing, and that is part of their liver metabolism. And so everybody kind of has a different response. Some people can handle higher amounts. Something that makes it much kind of an obvious indicator is your weight. So your body weight, how much fluid you have in your body, is going to help you handle more alcohol than someone who's really small and lean. So in running, there's all over the board, which is awesome. But if you're looking at kind of like super elite level, those guys are insanely lean. And so they're going to be affected more negatively from alcohol than someone who's a bit bigger, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah. That makes sense. Okay. So, I mean, in general, if you're coaching somebody, let's say it's me, I'm the average runner. I just love to get out there, but I am ambitious. Even though I have zero evidence to support it, I am starting to set my mind on a 24-hour finish at some 100-miler in the next couple of years. What's your advice to me or someone like me, like alcohol? If you can cut it out totally, you're going to be a better runner. I mean, is that the advice?
See, that's where it gets tricky. Is it really going to like increase your speed and performance overall? Maybe, but where I see it being something that can affect training negatively is, if you're feeling even a little bit sluggish in a day, a lot of the willpower, a lot of the mental energy may not be there. Being slightly dehydrated, you may not be able to do a workout as well as you would want. You may call a long run a little bit early if you just kind of mentally aren't quite there. So again, it affects the body quite a bit, but I'm like big on like the mental side of things. Like any brain fog, if you're trying to perform well in running, can really harm you and make you feel demotivated. And so I think that's where it's the biggest, because again, of that lack of sleep and that lack of quality sleep, it can just be like, even if it's one or two drinks, it can affect your motivation the next day.
Yeah.
So what I would say is like, okay, well, let's look at your biggest days, and let's just try to avoid, a 20-mile day. Just don't drink, because you're going to take a while to rehydrate. You need to refuel. You need to replenish those glycogen stores. What about workout days? Those ones probably too. And then if you are going to incorporate it, let's just give you time between the run to get some food in you, get some water in you, and then also have time before going to sleep. You're right. So if you can somehow manage to get it, an hour or two after your run and 2 to 3 hours before sleep, it's not probably going to be that big of a deal if it's like one to two kind of thing. But those would be the tips I would give.
Yeah.
But then, on like really long days, it may be best to just try not to.
I mean, here's the harsh truth as a wind down on alcohol before we move into marijuana, is that part of alcohol's, use, and anyone, everyone's probably going to have their own, is all of those times in that you have just restricted it is a time where, I think it's time to have a drink, like close to bed, the nightcap, or, long day, whatever society has told us really through movies and all this that has romanticized it. I would even say the same, that's what cigarettes is. Or by the way, in Europe, I feel like 3 out of every 4 people who are my age and your age smoke cigarettes. It's crazy that Europe hasn't, that America, this is one thing we're ahead in, that we don't smoke. But if you restrict it in all of those places that you just mentioned, it's like, well, then it's more of a cerebral approach to alcohol. Like, okay, it's thoughtful. I'm going to have one here because it's thought. That is, to me, is disconnected from alcohol's main uses. Is because I'm using it to medicate. I'm using it to wind down. I'm using it for all these things. And what you're saying is like, well, those are the times that you really shouldn't be. So the times that are left available, you can have a beer at 7:30 a.m. on Wednesdays. It's like, well, it really challenged me to think, what's the purpose of consuming? We don't have to go into this now, but this is the question: is what's the purpose of consuming alcohol? Everyone's going to have a different answer, but in as much as it's medicinal, you've got some work to do. I've got some work to do.
It is kind of annoying. And, I've heard Peter Attia, who's a longevity doctor, talk about his alcohol consumption, and it sounds so regimented that it doesn't even sound enjoyable.
Yeah, I've heard him too.
Yeah, when I have a glass of wine, it's got to be at this time, this time between. I'll occasionally have a glass of wine with friends, but it's got to be in this time period. And it's just kind of like, I get what you mean. Like, it kind of can ruin the spontaneity of having a drink with a buddy. If someone comes over and like wants to have a beer with you, or, vent with you over a beer, it's like, well, sorry, this is against my training regimen. So like take it with a grain of salt. Like, again, going back to that emotional, mental, possible benefit that it has, and socializing with people and all those things, like, take that with a grain of salt. I don't think, it is what it is. But I also encourage people, like, just see what it's like without it too. Like, see how much of effect it really does have on you. Because even if you're a moderate drinker, like low to moderate drinker, it's amazing what a month off will do to kind of open your eyes on the effects. I often do that, where I'll just kind of do a stint and just be like, all right, let's see where I'm at with this, and see if it's just better not to. And every single time I'm like, this does feel better. And again, I don't go crazy with alcohol, but even that is like, oh, it does feel better, but it can be hard.
I took a year off from alcohol once.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, we talked about that.
Man, and I was really happy with it. Like, I was really, it's a slippery slope to get back into it, though. It's so easy. There's this analogy that the Easy Way to Quit Alcohol book talks about that I really liked. But it's like this type of plant that, it smells sweet. And so the fly will land on it because it smells so sweet, and you land on it, and he lands on it, and the fly is getting all of the sweetness from this plant. It's the pitcher plant. You get all the sweetness from the plant, and then the fly can even leave. But if it comes back and it eats again, and it goes a little bit further into the plant, it's stickier. And you go in further to the plant, and then all of a sudden it's got you, and the fly can no longer fly away again. And so even that first drink sometimes pulls you back in. So I took a year off, and I got kind of pulled back in, and not totally against my will. Of course, I'm an adult. I've made the decisions. But that was the year that I, like, my Wasatch, I was going into Wasatch. I was like, no drinking for a year. I'm going to crush Wasatch. And I was 12, at the halfway point. I was at the halfway point, like 11 hours. Like, I was feeling so good. And then I made a dumb mistake in that race, and had some whiskey that night, and I went into the pitcher plant. So all that to say, all right, so this is good. So thank you for that. I want to transition over to marijuana. This is a world that I don't know much about. But I know that a lot of people consume. A lot of my audience is in California and in Colorado, and many are in states where perhaps it's not illegal, but it's also not a problem. So hit me with high level on marijuana. What is it? What are the effects? I mean, obviously, clearly smoking it is probably not the way you want to go. You don't want to put smoke in your lungs, but let's go high level on marijuana.
Yeah. So CBD, let's talk about the two components, CBD and THC. So CBD is legal in most states, I believe now, which doesn't have any psychoactive effects. THC is what is the psychoactive component of marijuana. Before getting into that, it's interesting to note that we already have something called the endocannabinoid system.
Okay.
So we already are naturally getting quote unquote high. Like the runner's high is a similar effect that THC has on us. So we have this endocannabinoid system, and that kind of euphoria feeling, that runner's high, those endorphins, is very similar, obviously to a smaller degree, smaller effect, but it has we're already getting that THC effect by running. Yeah.
Okay.
So runner's high is that endocannabinoid system that we already have. So CBD, they both affect the endocannabinoid system in a different way. And CBD is more relaxing, helping with sleep. Honestly, CBD on its own, isolated, seems to be pretty helpful overall because it reduces pain and inflammation. Again, it helps with sleep. You can kind of choose types of gummies out there now that are just CBD, and you're looking into something that's pretty harmless without much side effect. THC, however, can be one that, that's what, again, makes you high. And it depends on the person again, but some people can get, a little bit panicked, higher heart rate. Most frequently people are going to have a higher heart rate when they consume THC. So that's not really ideal while you're running. You're already pushing your heart. Don't really want a higher heart rate. Talked a little bit about this with caffeine too. Like it's a double-edged sword. You're raising your heart rate as well, which can be, good because you feel kind of more energy, you feel more drive. But over long periods of time, that higher heart rate can kind of make you feel tired later on. But some people claim that THC makes them feel more focused, and it also can help them feel relaxed. So I think quantity is a big one on here. Depending on the dosage, some people can feel calm and relaxed at smaller amounts, and then they dive into that kind of anxiety inducing higher heart rate situation with higher amounts. So it's pretty dose dependent, but whether to say it's good or bad, I don't really know. And I did look into this a bit, and some people do fine, and other people may not. But like you said, the biggest thing is try to avoid smoking it, because that's affecting the lungs. But we live in a day and age where, like you said, it is legal in quite a few places, and you can know the dosage. Hopefully it's accurate, but you can know the dose, you can figure out what works for you, what amount works. But as far as like it enhancing performance, I have a hard time thinking that. I mean, because it kind of can dull pain, I would imagine that can help over long periods of time. One of the all-time greats, and he's very open about it, Carl Meltzer, used to take cannabis during 100-mile efforts.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he would actually partake during these 100-mile efforts, and he still has the record of the most 100-mile wins. So maybe we need to get him on and figure out.
Yeah, that
the
would be
effects.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so here's the use case that I at first was introduced to it as is, okay, so we want to avoid non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, as much as possible, period, especially while you're running and you're already taxing your kidneys. That what is it? That ibuprofen is just a really, really bad idea. And so, but if I have inflammation mid-race, this was someone presented to me like, well, we should probably, let's do some test long runs where rather than ibuprofen or just dealing with it, that we try cannabis. I never did that, but I know that there are people out there doing that. So, I mean, you kind of touched on it, but I mean, is that the use case? Like if you're middle of the pack, back of the pack runner, not terribly concerned with time, that maybe you consume it in some form and the pain dulls.
Yeah, that is a use case that could be helpful. And whether you just isolate the CBD or THC separately for those different effects is up to you, or a combination of both. But I really think it depends on the person. But the health effects, I don't think we're looking at something like alcohol. I think it is like a little less toxic, like we talked about, to the body. Again, with depending on the amount there. But as long as we're not inhaling, it could be, if you had to pick between the two, from the research I've done, it seems like a safer option if you had to pick between alcohol and cannabis. So
yeah. I think so. One of the interesting things to note here is that we look at the alcohol. At one point, it was 21 drinks, then 14. And we've worked our way down to like -1. That the alcohol lobby, like you got to assume that in order for someone to be able to tell us that 21 drinks was okay, that there was a massive industry that's interested in saying you can drink 21 of these in a week. And same thing with smoking, like when they, doctors used to prescribe them, there's a lot of money in these industries, and THC, as it's legalized, at least we're getting visibility into how much money is in that industry. So sometimes it can just become really hard to find a good information source, because if you read it and say, hey, it's not a big deal or in this way or that way, it's like, well, who paid for that? Who's going to benefit from me consuming more? So how do you do research on something like either of these topics, but especially marijuana right now, as it's a growing, like, even though these companies can't put their cash in banks yet, how do you find reliable research and insights on these?
That's a good question. I'm definitely not reading blogs. It's funny when I hear people like, I read this off a blog, and it's funny because I've blogged before, but I try to cite things, and if you get good citations, sure, you can actually read a blog, but if not, then it's kind of like, well, this is an opinion based thing here. I try to listen and read from people who are pro and against. I try to kind of see both sides. And then, of course, my favorite place to be is PubMed. So that's where you just see scientific research. And in this domain, it's typically non-biased. Like a lot of times you'll see funding, like you said, like if it's an alcohol study and Budweiser funded it, then I would be like, oh, okay, I'm not.
And we laugh, but I think that happens.
It probably does. Yeah, you're probably right with the money they have. And I feel like, especially this year at the Super Bowl, like I understand we always see, alcohol ads, but I feel like they're pushing it a bit harder. Because like I said, we're seeing a pretty big, I would be interested. I don't know the stats, but just from things I've heard, it sounds like alcohol is kind of being reduced overall in in kind of the younger generations. So maybe they're pushing a bit harder for that. But yeah, I think PubMed, where it's just kind of scientific research on participants, what's happening. And honestly, I haven't done too much on cannabis in those controlled settings, taking surveys, longitudinal studies. One thing I will say too about cannabis on the sleep, a lot of people have this perception that it does improve sleep overall. And I believe CBD isolated can actually improve sleep, but the THC can affect that REM sleep again. So what some people notice is that when they are pretty avid smokers and they stop, they have this effect called REM rebound, and alcoholics will have this too when they quit. It's where like you get so bombarded with dreams that it's really intense. So the REM sleep is when you're having dreams. And so you're just kind of not having dreams as much when you're consuming these substances. So when you do reduce or get rid of them, you're going to have this really interesting effect of your body wanting to catch up on REM sleep. And so you have these incredibly vivid dreams catching up on that REM sleep. So neither are necessarily like they come off as good for your sleep, but they're not really good for your sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I think an important distinction to make is that there's a difference then between sleeping and sleeping well. Because if I have too much alcohol at night, it's like clockwork for me. Like I'll go to bed at 10 o'clock and I will be awake at 2. 4 hours later, I will be awake and I cannot go back to sleep. So it can knock you out, but that's very different than sleeping well.
It is. Yeah, that's the misconception, is because it kind of puts you out doesn't mean it's improving your sleep. It's a sedative, it's a depressant, so it does help you fall asleep, but then you're not getting that good quality sleep. So on the does cannabis help performance? That's still up in the air. Does it affect sleep negatively? Yes. So again, going back to the recovery, Although I will say, I think that for recovery, there are some parts of it that are okay on the cannabis side, whereas alcohol, like there's really nothing helping the recovery there, where like cannabis, there could be some, but the sleep again, honing in on the sleep and just seeing how important that is, probably best to just like keep it minimal, or again, far away from sleep so you can metabolize it.
Yeah, in my mind, I was already starting to think, okay, like after my 100-mile efforts, like the way that my feet ache for 2 to 3 nights in a row, I think, oh yeah, maybe cannabis would be a good solution to that. And then immediately you say sleep, and it's like, well, I think I just need to deal with that. I'm going to get that pain gone quicker if I live with it, rather than try and shield it from my consciousness. Because as I shield from my consciousness, I'm ruining my sleep, which is prolonging it potentially or most likely.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And I need to dive more into, CBD as an anti-inflammatory. Like, is it obviously it doesn't compare to NSAIDs, but is it going to actually, expedite an injury? Is it actually going to expedite your recovery from a race? Like, I know there are some anti-inflammatory effects, but I think it's a little bit like, I don't think it's super drastic, as we would see in some ibuprofen.
Yeah. Okay, so then in the end, here's a question that we can end on. As I think about running, and in a scenario where I'm running and I'm 60 miles in, and someone might say, hey, that's a good point, like the way that your hips are, your knees, everything, like some THC would do you well. Elite runners or the great runners, I mean, the Jim Walmsleys, the Tom Evans, the Courtneys, have they trained in such a way where they are simply just hurting less at that point than I am, or are they just better at not letting it get to them?
I'd probably say that they're better at not letting it get to them.
Really?
Like I've
that's
heard
encouraging. As crazy as it sounds, that's very encouraging. It makes me feel hope, and also it makes me just blown away that they're doing what they're doing.
Yeah, no, they've talked about it, and like what's been cool, and I don't know if you've seen this, and it's kind of controversial. David Roach's, I don't know if we may have even already mentioned this on the podcast, but David Roach is essentially trying to win Western states.
I love it.
Yeah, and he's putting his training out there, and like it's cool to finally, for once, see what they do and the pain they go through to get that good, right? So I would say they definitely are experiencing what we experience, and perhaps even a little bit more. If an elite level, we're just trying to hang out. Like Courtney sometimes will just do a race with a family member and just hang out. Like she's not in pain. Like that's just enjoyment for her. But when they're pushing themselves to get the most out of themselves, I know for a while I'm like, it must be so easy for them. They probably don't even feel the kind of pain I'm experiencing right now.
Yeah.
And there's a degree of which, like, depending on the pain we're feeling, like newer runners are going to have more tendency to bonk. They're going to have harder times with their fat metabolism. When they stop eating or something, they literally can't keep going, where more experienced runners, they may not have that type of effect happen. So in some ways they can, with rigorous training year after year after year over a decade, they can avoid some of these like things that happen to new runners physiologically that they just don't have happen. But the amount of pain, I would say they're probably up there. I think they're experiencing what we do, and maybe even to a further extent worse. And that's the funny thing. Yeah. Like seeing David, like how many of us are willing to go there anyway? I'm not, I don't want to experience what he's experiencing. And that's what has been a hard pill to swallow, is like these days the competition is so hard. Before you could just jog and just train on volume, and like, hey, I ran 80 miles this week. Like that's all I needed to do. But now it's like, nope, you have to do volume and intensity now, even for 100-mile races. Like the competition's getting so brutal that pain's got to be more of your friend. You've got to accept pain in training. And a theory I have is if you can deal with a lot of the pain in training, then race day is probably going to be okay. You've built a tolerance to this pain. Your threshold's increased. You're okay a little bit more with pain. Then, so when race day comes, hopefully you can handle it okay.
Yeah. All right. So here's my conclusion is that with alcohol, in terms of from a physical standpoint that there really is nothing redeeming about it. If you want antioxidants, go get some blueberries, go do other things that'll be significantly better for yourself. If your goal is, you're not going to get any nutritional value from alcohol. The upside, only upside, if there is any to alcohol, is its power from a community standpoint and to a celebration, a tool for celebration, but one could have community and one could celebrate without alcohol. So all that's sort of up in the air. Coming from someone who consumes and lives in France, where wine is like €1 and it's amazing. Okay. On the other end, THC, maybe there's something that's debatable there. Some of it's to be determined. At least CBD seems to be more obviously useful and have a place, potentially could have a place in the rhythm of a successful ultra runner. And THC, in as much as it's not killing your sleep, also potentially could as well. Mm-hmm. How'd I do?
Yeah. That's great. Yeah, that nice. sounds good. And
all right.
Yeah, I think as things become more legalized, if they do for cannabis, perhaps there's more information coming out on that, and having someone race with it and someone race without. Maybe there is. I didn't go too much on the down the rabbit hole on that. I'll hit you up if I find something about someone racing on it and someone without it. So,
oh yeah, that would be interesting. All right, well, let's do this again soon.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it.
See you.